Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. I've now returned to China. Thank you for your patience over the last few weeks while I was traveling. Now, we have a big episode today, so let's jump in. And first up, the United States and China appear poised to ease tensions in their long-running trade war following 2 days of high-level negotiations in Geneva. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Sunday that the talks held with Chinese Vice Premier He Feng yielded, quote, substantial progress, end quote, and may mark a turning point in one of the world's most consequential economic disputes. Quote, we will be giving details tomorrow, that is on Monday today, but I can tell you that the talks were productive, end quote, Bessent told reporters after wrapping up meetings with He and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer. The meetings took place at the Geneva residence of the Swiss ambassador to the United Nations. Greer added that the pace of progress was surprising. Quote, it's important to understand how quickly we were able to come to an agreement, which reflects that perhaps the differences were not so large as may be thought, end quote. He credited earlier groundwork for the constructive tone of the discussions. Markets responded positively to the developments. U.S. equity futures climbed in early Monday trading, with S&P 500 and Nasdaq futures rising 1.3% and 1.7% respectively. Safe haven assets like gold fell 1.2%, and the yield on 10-year U.S. Treasuries ticked up to 4.41%. The dollar also gained ground, strengthening 0.2% against a basket of currencies. China's Vice Premier He confirmed the constructive nature of the meeting, telling state media that the sides had reached an, quote, important consensus, end quote. He announced that both countries would establish a permanent mechanism to hold future discussions on trade and economic issues. Citigroup analysts have outlined what they expect to be the general shape of a potential U.S.-China trade deal. Quote, it is now more likely that the U.S. would cut the total tariff rate to 45% sooner than expected, end quote, wrote analysts including Yu Xiangrong, adding, quote, we now have higher conviction in rollback or suspension of fentanyl tariffs at 20% and escalatory tariffs totaling 91%. If so, the US's effective tariff rate on China could drop to around 45%, still an elevated level but less prohibitive, end quote. China is likely to withdraw its retaliatory tariffs in a reciprocal manner, they said, with reversible concessions made in areas including fentanyl, rare earth, and possible purchases of more US goods in due course. Until recently, both sides have shown little willingness to return to the negotiating table. Chinese officials had accused Washington of economic bullying. Quote, the US has a massive 1.2 trillion trade deficit with the world, end quote, Greer said on Sunday, adding, quote, the president declared a national emergency and imposed tariffs, and we're confident that the deal we struck with our Chinese partners will help us work towards resolving that national emergency, end quote. Chinese analysts, however, argue that the US came to the table from a weaker position. Yang Panpan, an economist at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, pointed to a weakening dollar and eroding investor confidence in US markets. Quote, inflation is a major challenge for the US, end quote, Yang said, adding, quote, compared to the past, these concerns have intensified, end quote. However, in China, the country is facing a much more frightening crisis, falling into a deflationary spiral. Despite lingering skepticism and mutual accusations throughout the trade war, the Geneva meetings suggest a rare moment of alignment. Asia Society fellow Neil Thomas expressed today, quote, we'll know the talks really went well if they lead to a Trump-Xi call soon. That would add positive momentum to US-China negotiations and lift market sentiment on both sides of the Pacific, end quote. We will need to see. More concrete details are expected in the coming days, and we will follow this space very closely here on China Update. If you want to be on top of all the most up-to-date analysis on this trade war, part of the wider US-China Cold War, which has been so central to this changing world we're now living through, consider subscribing to China Update. Hit the bell notification icon and you will be. If you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to the like button. Next up, as many know by now, China is facing the biggest population collapse in the history of the world, likely. Even conservative estimates place the population decline in the hundreds of millions. The situation appears to be worsening too, as the population decline is being exacerbated by a marriage crisis. Indeed, the country appears to be facing a collapse in these numbers too, and not just in total numbers, but as a percentage of the population. In China, marriage registrations plunged nearly 21% in 2024. That's in 1 year, to a record low of 6.1 million, the lowest level since public records began in 1986. The worst levels on record. With marriage rates declining and birth rates falling in tandem, the demographic crisis, which is threatening the foundations of its economic future, looks to be intensifying. Traditionally, marriage in China has been closely linked to childbirth, with out-of-wedlock births discouraged by both social norms and bureaucratic hurdles. But as China's fertility rate sinks to around 1.01, well below the replacement rate of 2.1, and we note this is the official number, the real number could be much worse, and as population declines for the third straight year, these old norms are rapidly unraveling. General Secretary Xi Jinping has called for stronger cultural guidance around marriage and parenthood. Initiatives range from simplifying the marriage process and offering financial incentives. In places like Changshan County, young brides under 25 can claim a 1,000 yuan bonus, while Nanning Village offers up to 60,000 yuan for couples who stay married and have 3 children. Still, none of this seems to be working. The core issue isn't just economic, it's philosophical. Many young Chinese now champion a no marriage, no children lifestyle, citing high costs, shifting values, and growing disdain for traditional gender roles. On the internet, the sentiment is echoed by online influencers. Even the state's efforts to romanticize family life is clashing with a new generation of women who are financially independent and less willing to marry for economic security. This is the same trend that the developed world has seen over the last several decades. As fewer couples tie the knot, China's wedding industry is shrinking fast. The sector was worth $524 billion in 2019, but dropped below $400 billion last year. This is according to Daxue Consulting. A broader tally, including honeymoons, fitness programs, and wedding photography, fell to $2 trillion in 2023, lower even than pandemic-era levels. Meanwhile, to make things worse, the divorce rate is also a concern. Despite the government's 30-day mandatory cooling-off period introduced in 2021, 3.6 million couples still divorced last year. Divorce is no longer taboo, and for some it's even a social media event. As this graph shows, the trend is quite concerning, and indeed, if trends continue, China could get to a point where there are more divorces than marriages. Despite massive efforts, from cash bonuses to public campaigns, the government is struggling to reverse the demographic slide. Without marriages, it is likely that the birth rate collapse will continue, greatly exacerbating the overall population collapse and aging trend. China's approach has largely avoided immigration, unlike countries like Canada or Australia, and remains focused on internal cultural shifts. Even if the entire philosophy of the Chinese population shifted overnight and they opened their doors to immigration, it's unlikely that they could even get the numbers needed to keep the population afloat. And this is assuming that there are people who want to immigrate to China in large enough numbers. Not to mention the tremendous social and political upheaval large-scale immigration would likely cause. As China's youth redefines happiness and fulfillment on their own terms, the traditional institutions of marriage are becoming more a personal choice than a societal expectation. That shift may be healthy for individuals, but it presents a monumental challenge for a country trying to grow its economy and care for an aging population, with fewer workers and even fewer children. Indeed, this trend looks to be nothing less than catastrophic. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Monday, have a productive week, and I will see you for a new episode tomorrow.